Hello and welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations. We are on episode 2 of season 5. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. We have over 145 episodes recorded and available on YouTube. So if you miss out because of load shedding or your Tuesday nights have become busy, you can always watch later. Tonight's webinar is in honor of World Wetlands Day, and my colleague, Kyle Lloyd, telling us all about his work. World Wetlands Day was on the 2nd of February, so we decided to invite Dr. Kyle Lloyd onto the webinar to showcase his work to conserve wetlands. These are such important habitats for biodiversity, but also for providing water and water filtration and storage services for for us and for the environment. So Kyle is the Rockjumper Fellow of White-wingedFlufftail Conservation and the Wetland Conservation Project Manager. So quite a broad mandate. He oversees the research and conservation of the critically endangered white-winged flufftail, which serves as a flagship species for safeguarding South Africa's peat-based wetlands. And these wetlands are inhabited by a diversity of unique plants and animals. Kyle's responsibilities are broadly divided into conducting research on the bird's population dynamics, breeding biology, and moving patterns, as well as protecting wetland habitats by engaging with local landowners, improving habitat quality, and identifying potential threats, which can be mitigated through effective conservation measures. So with that, Kyle, you can turn on your video and unmute and start sharing your screen.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Christina. Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. Is sharing a screen now?
There we go.
Can you
take it away?
See everything? Great. Right, so I'll be presenting about one of our flagship species at BirdLife South Africa, the white-winged flufftail, and just how that has helped us to conserve wetland habitat. So this presentation is very much a case study of how we have achieved conservation biology by marrying multiple disciplines, namely applied ecology as well as on-the-ground management. So my talk will consist of 3 parts. I'll give you a project overview, discuss the project philosophy or how we approach conservation, as well as some of the project objectives and successes. So starting off with a project overview. For those that don't know, the white-winged flufftail is one of 9 flufftail species endemic to sub-Saharan Africa. It gets its name from these diagnostic white secondary flight feathers. And if you've had the privilege of seeing the bird, that's all you will see basically as the bird glides over sedge meadows and then disappears into the wetland vegetation. The bird is extremely cryptic or secretive in its behavior, which has posed a big challenge to understanding the bird's biology and also conserving it. And the bird is also considered to be critically endangered. That means it's one step away from becoming extinct in the wild. The bird breeds in high elevation wetlands during the summer months, and it also seems to be a wetland specialist, preferring intact sedge meadows. What helps us to accomplish many of our tasks is the fact that there are both international and national working groups that work to conserve the species. And these national and international working groups stem from the African Eurasian Migratory Waterbird Agreement. So this is an international treaty to which South Africa and several other African partners are a contracting party, and they list the white-winged flufftail as needing the highest level of protection. In 2008, a single species action plan was developed for the white-winged flufftail, and from that single species action plan, there have been several international working group meetings which have discussed how to implement the objectives of this action plan. So I'll just give you a brief history of the species, particularly focusing in South Africa. So the white-winged flufftail was described described in 1876 from type specimens that were collected in Potchefstroom. For the next century, there were only scattered records of the bird in South Africa. But a group of passionate citizen scientists found the bird regularly at a wetland called Middlepoint Wetland on a private farm, and they were concerned about the conservation status of this wetland, and so they decided to form the Middlepoint Wetland Trust in 1994. The first breeding records of the white-winged flufftail came from Ethiopia in 1997, and after this it was sort of thought that the white-winged flufftail bred in Ethiopia and were overwintering in South Africa. As I mentioned, the single species action plan was developed in 2008, and South Africa also became a part of the AWA in 2002. In 2012, BirdLife South Africa was invited to administer the Middlepoint Wetland Trust, and that's really when the organization's involvement began. And there have been multiple conservation and research successes since that time. In 2013, the bird received its globally critically endangered status. And then the real finding that changed everything was the first breeding records of the bird and its call being described and published in 2020. And that just illustrates just how secretive and cryptic this bird is in its behavior, that for nearly over 140 years, we didn't know what the bird sounded like. And we didn't know that it bred in South Africa. So it does pose a lot of challenges to its conservation. And these are the golden shots that were taken using motion detected camera traps at Middlepoint Wetland in northern Mpumalanga. So yeah, basically it was a female white-winged flufftail with chicks behind her. Although this talk isn't going to focus on the research that we're doing for the project, we are continuing monitoring using passive monitoring techniques such as motion detected camera traps, as I mentioned, as well as these camera trap tunnels. So these sort of mimic the understory of the wetland vegetation that is used by the bird and channels them through, and then they get captured on the camera. And then also using acoustic devices. So because we now know what the bird sounds like, we can deploy these devices without having to walk through wetlands and flush the bird, which is very destructive. And this image here just illustrates how difficult it is to see a bird. There's a female sitting on a nest taken in Burger Wetland in Ethiopia. So now moving on to the project philosophy. So here we have a fictitious species recovery curve for any threatened bird or species. And essentially a lot of work has been done by BirdLife South Africa, by other institutions and individuals to actually just diagnose what is the situation and status of the white-winged flufftail and understand some of its basic biology. And so we find ourselves in the phase of testing local conservation projects and initiatives at a local scale to see if they are successful in conserving the bird. And the hope is that these will be rolled out at a wider scale and lead to the recovery of the species. So the approach that we take to implementing these conservation projects is one of adaptive management, where we are learning through hypothesis testing. So we are using the research that has been conducted to develop conservation initiatives. We are testing and monitoring those and collecting data. And then based on the data, we are either upscaling it if it's successful to a wider scale, or we are refining and reassessing those initiatives. And so I've mentioned that the white-winged flufftail is really a flagship or ambassador species for wetlands. So by conserving wetland habitat for the white-winged flufftail, we are conserving water resources. We are conserving habitat for other species that use wetlands. We are bringing people from various socioeconomic backgrounds to the same table to achieve a common cause. And we are also using the bird through the annual Flufftail Festival as a sort of charismatic species that school children can engage with to learn more about wetlands and why they are important. But why do we need to protect wetlands or conserve them? Well, a recent national biodiversity assessment of wetlands and of all the habitat types in South Africa found them, along with estuaries, to be some of the most threatened and unprotected ecosystems in the country. But the real important reason is that wetlands provide us with a host of ecosystem services. And if wetlands become degraded, they lose their ability to provide these ecosystem services to the people around wetlands, as well as the larger community. Some of the most important ecosystem services that wetlands provide is the regulation and cleaning of water resources for downstream users. But wetlands not only serve local communities, they also serve the global community by sequestering carbon. And this is done in the peat layer. So I think just you need to give a little bit of an explanation of what is peat. So the plants in a wetland are building tissues and leaves and stems, and they're absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere to be able to put carbon into these vegetative structures. As the plants die, they fall into the water of the wetland, and the water is very low oxygen, what we call anoxic. And so these plants don't complete the whole decomposition process and release the CO2 back into the atmosphere. Instead, these plants decompose very slowly, but start to accumulate layer by layer in the wetland. And this forms a substrate called peat. And in fact, you can take cores of these peat samples, similar to an ice core, and you can track the history and changes that have happened in the environment. And this peat also gives the wetland its sponge-like properties. It's what is holding or retaining water and also cleaning it. So this is really the magic and what we are trying to conserve here. Moving on to project objectives. So we're addressing various aspects of wetland conservation. One of the big ones that we are trying to address is the management of wetlands. And two of the drivers that we as people have a lot of control over is the grazing and burning of wetlands. Some of the issues that we've seen is livestock trampling wetlands. So livestock being confined to a wetland for an extended period of time, trample that vegetation layer that is used by birds to forage and breed in, as well as burning at the incorrect time of year. So burning during winter months when it's very dry can cause fires to start burning that organic peat layer, such that the fires start to burn vertically down. So some of the solutions that we've developed to address these issues is to develop a wildlife-friendly fence to control the movement of livestock. So obviously, we don't want to fragment the landscape by erecting fences. We still want native species to move and transition through the landscape, particularly species associated with wetlands where there's high biodiversity. So we want to limit any mortalities and just not create obstacles to movement. And so we've designed a fence which essentially consists of smooth strands on the top and bottom, as well as getting the spacing right to allow animals and wildlife to move through while effectively keeping cattle out. Wetlands do need to be grazed. It just needs to be done at the right time of year. And so we're using fences to control that movement of livestock. We've also managed to coordinate a cool spring burn at a wetland site and monitor the biotic response following that. So we are advocating for cool spring burns after the first 25 mils of rain have entered these high elevation systems, so that there's some moisture in the peat layer, so that when the wetland does burn, and wetlands again do need to burn, that it doesn't destroy that sensitive peat layer. And so looking at the future, we want to evaluate and write up the data that we've collected and go through the peer review process. And something also we want to explore is how do the faunal communities of wetlands structure the habitat for other species like the white-winged flufftail? Do they create trails, for example, through the wetland? So here's just some images of the wildlife-friendly fence. We've erected 4 kilometers of this design, and we've set up motion-detected cameras along the fence line. It's been monitored now nearly for 15 months and will come to a conclusion. And we've had some very promising results of large terrestrial birds using it and crossing it without any mortalities, as well as some larger game. So we're very hopeful about this design and hopefully rolling it out across South Africa. We also want to be able to empower landowners with the knowledge and skills to be able to effectively manage wetlands. We want to give them the tools needed to basically put it in their own hands. And one way in which we can do this is by taking all of this information that is sitting in peer-reviewed journals, sitting with other specialists, and translating that into a very applied manner. So we are working with several co-authors. We are working with we are upskilling ourselves and our knowledge about wetlands. We are trying to conduct these studies to better inform our understanding of how wetlands function, and putting this into guidelines that will include illustrations, and hopefully making that available to landowners by the end of the year. Some of the future guidelines that we can look towards is looking at human-wildlife conflict that is associated with wetlands. So some very unique situations where things like otters and cormorants are predating on trout stocks, for example, and there's conflict between the fishermen and wildlife. So we need to look at ways of mitigating that by finding ethical solutions. In terms of wetland rehabilitation, this is a very expensive endeavor. And so our role here is more advisory or to act as a facilitator or liaison. And we provide advice to Glencore, which is a mining company conducting an offset in the Greater Larkin Flow protected environment. I'll discuss that protected area a little bit later on. And here we're just trying to get the timing of the implementation right so that it doesn't affect white-winged flufftail and only benefits the species. And so we're very grateful to them and WSP, the consultants, for allowing us to be part of this process, as well as Flurin Fillet Nature Reserve, where we also provided some initial advice to Working for Wetlands in how the rehabilitation there can also create and maintain habitat for white-winged flufftail to get those specialist habitat conditions right. In meeting annually with the National Working Group, we also provide a list to stakeholders of the wetlands that are most important for white-winged flufftail, and we propose some conservation measures that the management authority of those wetlands can take, many of which is rehabilitation. And so again, we're also offering or seeking to provide candidate sites to consultants who are looking for sites for biodiversity offsets for developers who need to offset their impacts by rehabilitating other sites. In terms of wetland protection, I think it's just worth reminding everyone about the different levels of biodiversity stewardship agreements that the government can enter into with landowners. The two that we really focus on is nature reserves and protected environments, which are the top two tiers. And that's just because there's a lot of more legal protection to keep external threats out that are incompatible with the conservation of wetlands, as well as the level of commitment that's required from a landowner, just ensures that the site will be correctly managed. We don't want to just create paper parks. So we were part of the declaration of Middlepoint Nature Reserve. So this is located in northern Mpumalanga province, along this eastern escarpment, which consists of a chain of high elevation systems. And it's at Middlepoint Nature Reserve now that is the only confirmed breeding site of the white-winged flufftail in South Africa and in fact the Southern Hemisphere. We identified two private landowner groups who've come together to form this nature reserve. And together with Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Agency, the reserve was declared in 2022. We as BirdLife South Africa and Middlepoint Wetland Trust have entered into a co-management agreement with the landowners to assist with the management of this reserve. And last year that took the form of developing the management plan, which will be reviewed every 5 years, as well as the annual plan of operation, which is basically how do the objectives of that management plan or how are they implemented on a year-to-year basis. The site is also obviously very important, not only from a national perspective, but from an international one. And so we assisted with the designation of the site as a Ramsar site, adding it as, I think, the 29th site within South Africa. And that just gives the site international recognition and accountability going forward. So surrounding Middlepoint Nature Reserve is a network of other wetlands called the Greater Larkenvlei. And these also provide wetlands that are suitable for white-winged flufftail, which may be used by the species. And this is all located on a plateau of a mountain range called the Steenkampsberg. And there a protected environment was declared in 2017, and that comprises 14,000 hectares of farmland. So essentially what a protected environment means is that the farmer can continue with their day-to-day activities to derive income from the land, but they are doing it with conservation in mind. They are doing their actions and management with a sustainable mindset. And we were looking at trying to incorporate more farms and expand the protected environment with the GLPE Landowners Association. So this is a committee of landowners who oversee the management of this nature reserve. And so we assisted with site assessments and landowner questionnaires, and the site was expanded by over 7,000 hectares towards the end of 2023. The plans this year is possibly to review the management plan. And we're also looking at ways of providing post-declaration support. So using things like remote sensing, how can we provide advice to landowners about the history of their fire regimes, for example, and maybe possibly even providing herbicide assistance for woody alien invasive clearing. So a very obvious low-hanging fruit for us for stewardship is to use birds as a means of encouraging conservation on properties, as well as creating awareness amongst the public. And so together with the Escarpment Bird Club, we established 3 birding routes centered around the town of Dahlstrom, which is sort of central within the Steenkampsberg mountain range. And we erected signboards all along these routes. And on these signboards is a QR code that people can scan, and it takes them to a dedicated web page housed on BirdLife South Africa's website, where they can download things like species lists, GPS routes, places of stay. And we don't just focus on the birds, we're looking at every aspect of nature, including dragonflies, butterflies, geology, even human history. And hopefully this will encourage people to go and explore the countryside and also bring more income towards landowners who derive income from ecotourism. The QR code also allows us to keep track of how many people scan the code, which showed that nearly 600 people scanned it over the course of last year. Obviously, all information is protected for people who scan the code, so we don't collect any information about their individual contacts or details. It's just pure numbers. This whole project was sponsored by local businesses within Dahlstrom, which just to me illustrates the need for this project and the desire for people to see ecotourism flourish in the countryside. And here we are trying to provide a financial incentive for landowners. So if they see that they are deriving an income from the biodiversity on their property, they're more likely to conserve it, as well as just developing an appreciation for what's on their land. We also engage with communities, and we are working with the Empowering People program at BirdLife South Africa for the Insekeni Nature Reserve Community Project. So this is a reserve located in southern KZN. It's a massive reserve. It's in a strategic water source area, so it's very important for water provisioning. It's Ramsar, and it is home to several threatened and endemic bird species, including the white-winged flufftail. Over the reserve and the wetland is facing threats from just the lack of resources and community pressures, so namely community cattle entering the reserve and grazing. And so Empowering People program is looking at ways of trying to create bottom-up approaches to encourage community to keep cattle out of the reserve by improving the management of communal lands. We work with the management authority, Ecotourism Wildlife, as well as traditional authorities and many other local stakeholders to accomplish projects related to ecotourism, habitat restoration, and reserve infrastructure. Now, there are several projects that have taken place since its inception in 2022, or when it began. But some of the main ones that we are carrying on for the long term is monthly bird transect, so monitoring changes in the habitat And that again allows us just to track how our interventions, how are they affecting the bird community, as well as just monitoring within the wetland, the white-winged flufftail, and also providing biosecurity, so keeping community cattle out. We also work with our wonderful policy and advocacy program to comment on development applications that may be incompatible or threaten some of these key sites where the white-winged flufftail is found. We also present annually to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment White-winged Flufftail National Working Group. And this is a working group that consists of not only stakeholders from government, but also from private sectors, from parastatals. So we're all bringing, again, people around the same table to talk about white-winged flufftail, and namely wetland conservation. Something to look towards in the future is trying to better understand the movement patterns of white-winged flufftail, particularly along the eastern escarpment, as we see a movement of wind energy development coming into the Mpumalanga and Free State provinces. And so obviously we just want to be able to advise the correct placement of these wind energy facilities to have the least impact on threatened birds. And lastly, wetland awareness. And here we're really trying to engage different demographics and age groups. So as I mentioned here, we have the annual Flufftail Festival. And the hope here is to expand it to the rural community, so expand it out of Gauteng and look at communities that are neighboring wetlands where the white-winged flufftail are found. We're also developing 2 children's books, which we hope to have completed by the end of the year. And here several volunteer authors and illustrators and graphic designers have given up their time generously to develop 2 children's books, which will contain glossaries, and hopefully we can also translate into some local languages at a later date. We have developed some short videos like the Steenkampsberg birding routes, but we want to continue to develop short videos for the project because we just feel like this is a really great way to engage with more diverse demographic groups, particularly the younger ages. So I just want to end off by saying thank you to the many funders of this project, as well as all the staff at BirdLife South Africa who've made this project possible and continue to make it a success, as well as the various individuals who continue to provide mentorship and guidance. Thank you. That's it from me.
Great, thanks very much, Kyle. That was a great overview of all the amazing work that you're doing to help conserve our wetlands and the amazing white-winged flufftail. So we have plenty of time for questions. Before we get there, I just want to remind everyone that you can put your questions in the Q&A box. Please not in the chat feed, as it's hard to keep track of those. Or if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put those in the comments. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back with another webinar, and this one will be actually our 150th webinar, so that'll be quite an exciting event, and we will be joined by Mike Buckham and Cliff Dawes from the Cape Bird Club and the City of Cape Town, respectively, who will be telling us about the initiative that was running last year, the Cape Bird Club and City of Cape Town Big Year. So please do tune in for that talk in 2 weeks' time. So Kyle, oh, a question has just popped in. Okay. Thanks, Shashi, asking, what are the major threats to wetlands in South Africa?
Yeah, so obviously there's threats which result in the complete destruction of a wetland, like things like mining, particularly in the high veld, as well as building dams, which would completely flood a wetland. But the more subtle threats that our wetlands face is sort of degradative impacts, like things within the system, like people draining wetlands. So historically, people were actually encouraged to dig drainage channels through a wetland, and this essentially just dries a wetland out. But also, yeah, just the mismanagement of those drivers, like burning and grazing. But then we also need to look at a wetland, not just in isolation, but within the context of its catchment. So wetland is being supplied by inputs, not only upstream, but also laterally. So water and nutrients and sediments. And we need to look at the impacts that threaten some of those impacts, some of those inputs. So things like forestry, there's a lot of water that is lost through evapotranspiration from woody alien invasives, as well as building any infrastructure, anything that could impact some of those inputs entering the wetland.
Yeah, great, thank you. So Glynis Kutsia asks, will there ever be a time when we may be able to see or hear the white-winged flufftail?
Yes, that's certainly a hope. We certainly believe that for people to really experience and care about the bird is to actually have a personal experience with it.
Absolutely.
And I think that the Student Comes Back Birding Routes was a way of trying to carry out that philosophy. And so we are exploring ways of ethically viewing the bird without having to drag ropes through the wetland and flushing the bird, because we now know that these high elevation wetlands, which are the breeding habitats for the bird. So we don't want to disturb the breeding biology of a critically endangered bird. So we are developing ways and trialing means, which I can't share with you now, but watch the space.
Great. We will get you on for an update when you're ready to share. So Peter Nelson asks, or says he's really keen to know the specific habitat requirements of the white-winged flufftail and how do we get this right, reeds versus sedges, etc. Do you know the answers to that?
Yeah, so we know the broad habitat requirements of the bird. We are trying to better understand the fine scale habitat requirements, but essentially it consists of these sedge meadows. So sedge is a group of plants similar to, as grasses would be a group of plants. And so the sedge mix within wetlands, and anything sort of below ankle deep water is what we're looking for. And yeah, you're very correct in talking about reeds. So things like bulrushes and reeds, Typha and Phragmites. These are pioneer species within wetlands, so they respond to disturbance. So typically there'll be erosion within the catchment, and there'll be sediment deposition within the wetland, as well as excess nutrients. And then you have these plants, these reeds coming up. And that replaces and outcompetes these sedge meadows, which are used by the white-winged flufftail. And so that pushes the bird out. But instead of wasting our time in trying to control the symptom, which is the expansion of reeds and bulrushes, we need to address the cause. And so we need to look what is causing this erosion and sediment deposition within the catchment and the wetland.
Great, thanks for that. And then Michael, Michael Potts says, many thanks for a very informative webinar. And do we know how many breeding pairs of white-winged flufftails there are in the Middlepoint wetland area? I guess that's the million-dollar question, hey?
Yeah, no, that is something we're working on. We're collecting data on that to try and better understand the home range and how the territories look. A rough estimate based on just my thoughts, perhaps maybe 5 breeding pairs, maybe 6 breeding pairs, possibly more. It really is, we're waiting for the data to show us, and that's what we're working through now. So the project is entering a phase of data analysis and write-up after 3 years, actually 4 years of collecting data, whilst running all of these other conservation projects simultaneously.
Yeah, there's just so much to do and learn about the species that it's quite hard to do it all at once.
Yeah.
So there's 2 similar questions which I'm going to group. One from Liz, saying, is the Ethiopian population separate from the South African, and is the Ethiopian one being monitored and conserved? And then Dave Whitelaw also asks, what measures are there to protect it in Ethiopia?
All right, so this is quite a tricky one, or tragic one. So a genetics paper did show that there weren't significant differences between the 2 populations in Ethiopia and South Africa, which did support at the time that there may be some gene exchange between the populations. But we are also trying to work on refining that and analyzing DNA as that technology also develops and progresses to better understand that. We also know that it's a very old species. It was one of the first flufftails to break away from the common ancestor, which may impact just the sort of genetic mutations and accumulation that's happened over time. In terms of Ethiopia itself, currently a paper that was published in 2020 found that Berger Wetland seems to be the only site with white-winged flufftail left, and it only has capacity to support 55 breeding pairs,
Sure.
if I'm not mistaken. And that's obviously facing huge threats from the surrounding landscape, particularly livestock entering the reserve, entering the wetland. So there are attempts at trying to better the conservation of that site and really focus in on it. So Middlepoint Wetland Trust did a lot of community work there by developing a school and creating incentives for herdsmen, and then also trying to declare the site a protected environment. And currently there's work led by AWA and the Ethiopian partner and BirdLife South Africa to try and look and explore at community projects to just better the status of that site.
Okay. Yeah, it seems key to get that one protected if it's the only place that they're breeding. So another kind of grouping of questions from Janet, asking whether if you know if the white-winged flufftail occurs in Wackerstroom, and then Eleanor Mary asking what's the southernmost range of the bird, and Sashin Pillay asking, is Middlepoint the only known breeding habitat, and have potential recordings been noted in other sites that can't be confirmed? So I guess a whole bunch about their distribution and where they breed.
Okay. Sorry, let me just, what is that first one?
Oh, the first one was, does it occur in Wackerstroom?
Yes, sorry. Yes, it does occur in Wackerstroom. It was captured there actually by chance in a mist net by registered bird ringers, which must have been an incredible experience. And since then, part of our work is to survey wetlands around Wackerstroom and to see if there's more sites in that area that has the bird. The most southerly site, at least current records, is likely to be the Insekeni area or southern KZN, but specimens were also, but the bird was recorded as far as King Williamstown in the Eastern Cape, I think. That was actually where the first record was made or officially captured and reported. And yes, so I guess to answer the question, yes, we are picking up the bird at more sites. We've been deploying acoustic devices on both public and private land. And yeah, we have to continue to analyze that data, many hours of acoustic recordings to pick up the bird's call. And hopefully, yeah, that will be made known in a publication at some date.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, just really, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It just really helps to direct our limited resources and capacity at these key sites, as we find more sites and engage with landowners where the bird may be on their property.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eddie asks an interesting question, saying, if a new wetland is suitable for flufftails, how do the birds get there? Do they get there on their own, or can they be encouraged in any way?
I think honestly the birds get there on their own. It seems they really track what we call a niche. So their collection of habitat requirements, they really track it very carefully. And we can see how things like rainfall patterns can affect that. So some wetlands may become suitable just based on the amount of moisture content in some years, and in other years they may be unsuitable just because of the rainfall for that year. And even within the rainfall season, we see that the bird really tracks its niche. So there's a lot of gradients within a wetland, obviously from the top to the bottom of the wetland, but also from the sides. And the bird will track that movement or track its niche as the water levels fluctuate throughout the season. In terms of attracting a bird to a wetland, I don't think there's any way of actively doing that other than to create or to manage the wetland and rehabilitate it to a state where it is suitable for the bird. And hopefully it will do its own thing by finding that wetland.
So you don't think decoys and calls would work like I'm doing it for the penguins?
Ah, it's definitely something. Yeah, I guess we are indirectly trying to look at ways of better understanding how the bird responds to stimulants like that. Yeah.
Mm. Now there's a question from Kevin McCann, who's works for Conservation Outcomes and is a good partner of BirdLife's, saying, thanks for your amazing work, Kyle. And can you tell me what the reasons are for the landowners entering into the protected environment?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so I think some of the very honest answers, if they see threats to their livelihood and their practices, many of them will be far more willing to enter into to declare their land as a protected area. So for us, we face a lot of threats from mining, and so a lot of farmers don't want to lose their livelihood, and the effects that has on parts of the catchment upstream of these landowners. And so a lot of them come together as a community to enter into things like a protected environment. But I think with the expansion of the Greater Larkin Flare protected environment, I think many landowners saw the benefits of being part of that, which in our case is providing that post-declaration support, whether it's from NGOs or the provincial conservation body, by providing a sort of community approach to the management of a landscape, so that there's it's not everyone doing their own thing, but it's more consistent across the whole landscape, so that everyone's in sync with each other.
Great. And then, sorry, there's a question from Marinus asking, does your wildlife-friendly fence work for smaller livestock species like sheep as well?
No, we would probably need to relook at the design for things like sheep. It was specifically designed for cattle, which seem to be the most prevalent livestock in these high elevation systems. I know historically things like places like downstream had sheep, but I think just with the state of things like stock theft and that, many have turned to livestock, to cattle, sorry. And so, yeah, the fence is specifically designed for controlling the movement of cattle.
Okay, great. And it's yeah, great to see the preliminary results you've had from that wildlife friendly design. So that's great. Sorry, just looking for the next question. So Heidi asks what effects herbicides and pesticides have on wetlands, whether it affects it detrimentally or whether the wetlands are able to filter out the chemicals without being affected.
Yes, so I mean, yeah, that's a great ecosystem services that wetlands provide, but we need to keep in mind that it's retaining now all of these pesticides and herbicides, which isn't great for the wetland itself. And so even though it is helping us, and particularly downstream users, it is over time degrading its ability to carry on filtering and keeping out those pollutants and chemicals, which is going to affect the invertebrate community, for example, which will have knock-on effects on the trophic web of a wetland.
Yeah, absolutely. Then Gordon Holtman asks, by what standards do you judge the white-winged flufftail to be critically endangered? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the red listing process. If you
so so the red listing process follows a standard sort of protocol set up by the IUCN, which sort of dictates the way in which we assess the status of a species, and it falls within a certain category, and the white-winged flufftail falling into critically endangered. That can take on the forms of counting exact population numbers. It can take the form of distributions, so how much habitat is available to support the birds, and various other criteria that can help inform us. I obviously wasn't part of the process of determining the status of the white-winged flufftail. That was done in 2013, but I suspect it was as a result of just the very low records that were picked up, and the fact that our wetlands we're losing our wetlands, and there are very few available sites left for the bird. Part of what we're trying to do with our research is to provide an more robust empirical estimate of the numbers that are in South Africa, which is very difficult for a cryptic bird, a very secretive bird. We can't count, exactly how many there are, but we are trying through indirect means, like determining home range and how many pairs then would fit into a wetland, and combine that with habitat suitability models. So how many sedge meadows, for example, are there in South Africa? So we can kind of determine, how many pairs can fit into the available wetlands in the country.
Yeah, great. And it's also about the rate of change of some of these factors, like how quickly are the habitats shrinking or being degraded, and that kind of thing that all feeds into the red listing assessments. So Steve and Anelli ask whether you've used camera traps to check for possible breeding at Nsekeni.
Yeah, we definitely want to and have expanded to Nsekeni. We want to better understand the importance of the site for the bird. So yeah, again, we'll see what the data reveals. So yeah, hopefully in another webinar we can present about that.
Yeah, great. We'll definitely have you on when you have some news to update us with. And then Eleanor Mary has asked how Ngula Wetlands and the Eskom partnership there, whether you have any dealings with that project.
Yeah, so no, the project does fall within the Ngula partnership. A lot of the initial white-winged flufftail conservation work was supported by that partnership. Yeah, we've surveyed some of the wetlands that are at Ngula, and again we'll see what the results reveal. But yeah, I think the construction of the dam has really altered a lot of the habitat downstream of the dam wall. So yeah, we're holding thumbs that the bird is still there, but there's a lot of Phragmites, for example, which is unsuitable for white-winged flufftail. The bird historically was at the reserve, and that kickstarted a lot of it kickstarted the whole partnership, and the reason Eskom needed to offset and encourage wider conservation in the area.
Okay, great. And then, so Peter Law asks about the migration of the white-winged flufftail between South Africa and Ethiopia, and what evidence there is for that migration.
Again, yeah, so that's something that we're exploring. I can see that there's a research webinar needed. Yeah, so the fact that the bird is breeding in Ethiopia and South Africa, it's unlikely that they're migrating between the two countries. But again, we're trying to explore, maybe they're meeting at some other sites, some other lower latitude, or they could be following different migration pathways. So we're trying to explore that in further detail. Sorry, I can't give you a definite answer.
No, that's fine. It would be great to get some tracking devices on these birds if you could ever catch them.
That's the issue, is that we're unlikely to ever recapture the bird. Therefore, we need a GPS device or something there, which also carries its own power source. And that just currently technology doesn't allow us to put a tracking device on the bird because it's just too small. It wouldn't be ethical to put these devices on the bird because they're unlikely to fly or just not survive with that extra weight.
Yeah,
so we also waiting for technology to catch up.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with a critically endangered species, you don't want your research to be another cause of decline. So I really like all your sort of low impact and remote monitoring stuff that you're doing. So Aaron asks, which peat wetlands, according to your current habitat predictions, do you regard as the core of the white-winged flufftail population? You know, in KZN, in Sekeni, or Middlepoint, or, you know, Wakkerstroom area.
Yeah, so I think you know, the birds once had a very wide distribution. You know, type specimen was collected in Potchefstroom. The first specimen was, or first recorded specimen was King Williamstown in Eastern Cape. So I think that is really contracted to that eastern escarpment that that runs along Mpumalanga, Free State, and KZN, and that the birds are focused along that line, essentially that geological unit, if you will, of the Drakensberg that extends all the way up, you know, carrying on into the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe. So that geographical feature contains all these high elevation wetland systems, and right at the top of these catchments. So unfortunately, a lot of, you know, the lower areas of catchments have been transformed. There's, you know, a lot of development. So these pristine wetlands are right at the top of these catchments, and that's where the birds are likely to be focused.
Okay. Just checking quickly on Facebook because I've been neglecting Facebook. There's no questions there. And then Alice asks, is there a potential for rehabilitating some of the wetlands in the historic distribution? I mean, do we know why they're kind of not there anymore, and could we try and get them back?
No, we definitely can. We know at these historical sites what's causing the habitat to become unsuitable. I think of Franklin Flay. There's a big sawmill dump basically that has leached a lot of excess nutrients into the wetland, and has caused an expansion of Phragmites, for example. So again, if we take away the cause of what's affecting the drivers of a wetland, of the drivers that maintain the wetland vegetation community, we can certainly bring these wetlands back. Wetlands are extremely dynamic, very highly productive systems. So, you know, unlike arid environments, which can take a very long time for rehabilitation to bring it back to an original ecological state, wetlands can bounce back.
Yeah, that is one good thing about them, or one of many good things about them. It just, as you said, I think in your talk, it takes quite a lot of hard work and money to do so. But let's hope we can get there someday. There's still a few questions, and we're not quite at 8 o'clock, so I'll just keep going if you're happy.
Yeah, happy. Thank you.
So Gordon,
thank you for the interest.
Gordon Holtman asks about whether you believe the highlands water from Lesotho coming into the southern Free State will have any effect on the wetlands in that province. So I don't know if you know anything about the Lesotho Highlands water project, but yeah, any thoughts?
I mean, I don't know enough in depth and what measures have been taken. But essentially, you know, as I mentioned, anything that affects these upstream and lateral inputs into a wetland, anything that affects the flow regime, can affect the drivers of a wetland. So I don't know enough about what mitigation measures have been taken in to maintain those inputs. But yeah, if it does limit it in some way or change it in some way, it could have downstream effects on these wetlands. But
Okay.
I honestly, I don't know enough to give a proper answer on that one.
No, that's fine. So Vilnieri's asking, what was the land use of the nature reserve prior to being protected, and why did they choose that area? I'm not quite sure which nature reserve is being referred to, but I don't know, perhaps Middlepoint Nature Reserve. I'm not too sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Middlepoint, it's still a cattle farm. It was a cattle farm. It still is. Again, we're not trying to limit people from deriving revenue from land. We're trying to do conservation hand in hand with land use practices, and so So grazing continues. It's just done in a way that adheres to strict guidelines that are not going to impact the wetland for the benefit of the white-winged flufftail. And so things like that management plan that we spoke about will address some of those. And the annual plan of operation is sort of the practical steps that are taken to implementing those objectives and ensuring that it's done correctly. So we need to provide an annual report to the Provincial Conservation Management Authority, Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Agency, and that will capture if we've been doing that correctly.
Great, yeah, and it's really important to work with the landowners because we need their support to be able to do what we do. So Peter Lever asks what I think will be quite a tricky question. What is the white-winged flufftail carrying capacity of the Middlepoint Nature Reserve? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, hi Peter. So Peter's one of the landowners of Middlepoint Nature Reserve. Again, the data is going to show us, but I think I mentioned I suspect maybe 6 breeding pairs, so possibly 12 birds or even more. Again, we don't know what the breeding biology looks like, how territorial these species are, how subordinate males interact with these territories. So yeah, possibly more. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Hopefully we will one day find a empirically derived answer to that. Yeah. So we have just one more question from Aaron asking about your opinion on the old white-winged flufftail record near Durban Airport in St. Lucia. He's suggested maybe that's an altitudinal non-breeding migration. Do you have any insights to share with us?
Yeah, so that's definitely those more low altitude records have certainly led us along the same train of thought of that possibly the migration pathway is maybe not latitudinal, but possibly altitudinal, following the peat systems that run along the catchment from the headwaters down to the coast. So yeah, again, we are exploring that, and hopefully we can provide you with an answer.
Okay, great. It seems like we'll definitely have to have you on for another white-winged flufftail focused webinar at some point. So hopefully we can make that happen once some of your research has come to fruition. But I think we'll leave it there. It's just gone 8 o'clock. So thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you very much to our audience for joining us this evening. It's great to be back on your screens for another year. And we have another great episode coming up in 2 weeks' time with Mike Buckham and Cliff Dorse speaking about the City of Cape Town Cape Bird Club Big Year that took place last year. So please do join us for that. Kyle, any last words before we close?
No, just to really thank everyone for the interest they've shown. Thank you to all of my BirdLife colleagues, Middlepoint Wetland Trust, Downstream Trout Farm, Elands Valley Guest Farm, who form Middlepoint Nature Reserve. Just there's so many individuals that have been part of this whole process to make it happen. So again, just thank you for your concern and care for white-winged flufftail and wetlands and the benefits they give society. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And yeah, there were some good questions in there. So thanks to our audience for putting those in. And yeah, thanks again, Kyle. And we'll see you all again in 2 weeks' time. Good night.
Bye-bye.